The reception hall buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Gold ribbons shimmered under the warm chandelier glow, and all eyes were on the gift table stacked high with glossy boxes. My brother-in-law, Ryan, swaggered over with that smug grin he always wore when he thought he was the center of attention. He picked up my carefully wrapped package, gave it a dramatic shake, then tore into it while everyone watched. Out came a modest, handmade photo album I had spent weeks crafting, filled with memories, stories, and handwritten notes for the couple. Ryan held it up like a cheap trinket. Seriously? This is junk. His laughter echoed, and a few others nervously chuckled with him. My face burned as his words cut deeper than he knew. I stayed silent, even as the humiliation pressed down. Because what Ryan didn't know, what no one knew, was that this wasn't the real gift. The real gift was waiting. And when it came to light, it wouldn't just humble him. It would change everything. Before that night, I had always believed weddings were about love, unity, and family coming together. But when it came to Ryan, my soon-to-be brother-in-law, family was just another stage for him to play out his arrogance. I wasn't the kind of person to chase the spotlight. My life was steady, simple, and quietly fulfilling. I worked long hours at my job as a community planner, the kind of work that doesn't get applause but keeps neighborhoods alive. When neighbors needed help with zoning issues, fundraising for schools, or even something as small as fixing a broken bench at the park, I was the one who quietly took the lead. I never boasted. I never demanded recognition. Ryan, on the other hand, was the opposite. He thrived on being noticed, loud at family dinners, competitive in even the smallest games, and constantly showing off whatever flashy gadget or expensive toy he had bought that week. He was the type of man who measured worth in price tags and dismissed anything that didn't shine under a store spotlight. My sister Emily adored him anyway. She insisted that beneath the bravado, Ryan had a good heart. I wanted to believe her, but experience had taught me otherwise. One memory stood out, a year before the wedding. It was at Emily's birthday dinner. I had spent hours baking her favorite cake, a layered chocolate mousse decorated with fresh raspberries from my own garden. Ryan had sauntered in late, carrying a shiny, overpriced handbag with the tags still dangling. When Emily opened my cake, Ryan chuckled and muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Cute, but she deserves better." Emily had scolded him, but the damage was done. The sting of his words stayed with me. That was Ryan's pattern, tearing others down just enough to make himself look taller. Still, I never confronted him. I believed actions spoke louder than words. And when Emily announced their engagement, I decided I would give them a wedding gift that wasn't just another object to collect dust. It would be something meaningful, something lasting. Over months, I crafted a photo album filled with snapshots from childhood, notes of encouragement, and family recipes passed down from generations. Every page was hand-designed, pressed with dried flowers, and stitched with care. It wasn't flashy, but it was a reminder of where Emily came from and the love that would always be with her. But I also had another part of the gift. Something Ryan couldn't even begin to imagine. I had been quietly saving money for years, tucking away bonuses, small freelance earnings, and even loose change in a jar shaped like a glass lighthouse. It was my someday fund, but as the wedding approached, I knew what I wanted to do. Alongside the photo album, I planned to gift Emily and Ryan the down payment for their first home, a way to help them start strong, to give them security instead of shallow glamour. The album was just the prologue. The true present, the real surprise, was sealed inside a plain white envelope tucked safely in my bag. But Ryan, of course, never looked past what was right in front of him. To him, the album was all there was, and in dismissing it so cruelly, he had unknowingly lit the match for a fire that would spread far beyond that wedding reception. Because if there was one thing Ryan had never learned, it was this. Not every treasure comes with a price tag. And soon, everyone in that glittering reception hall was going to find out just how wrong he was. After the wedding night, Ryan's laughter about my junk gift didn't end at the reception hall. It spread. Subtly at first, then louder, bolder, as though humiliating me had become his private sport. Family dinners grew heavier with his presence. He'd retell the junk gift story like it was the funniest joke he'd ever heard, exaggerating every detail for an eager audience. "You should have seen his face when I said it," he'd roar, slapping the table while cousins and uncles smirked uncomfortably. Emily would sometimes hush him, but Ryan always had the last word. It wasn't just about the gift anymore. He began questioning everything I did. If I brought a casserole to a gathering, he'd poke at it with a fork and say, "Did you forget the salt?" If I wore a new shirt, he'd smirk. "Nice. Discount rack?" Each jab felt small on its own, but together they stacked like bricks on my chest. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, his words replaying in my mind. My heart thudded like a drum, and my body felt heavy, trapped between anger and silence. Part of me wanted to shout back, to humiliate him the way he did me. But another part of me, the part that believed in keeping peace, kept swallowing it down. The family's silence cut deeper than his insults. My parents never confronted him, worried it would cause a rift with Emily. Some cousins even laughed along, eager to stay on Ryan's good side. The more isolated I felt, the more his smug grin haunted me. Still, I resisted. I worked longer hours, poured myself into projects that mattered, but stress took its toll. I could feel it in the tight knots in my shoulders, in the way my hands trembled when I poured coffee, in the restless nights where my mind refused to quiet. Then, one evening after a particularly tense family dinner, something shifted. I was in the kitchen helping to clear plates when Emily's best friend, Claire, slipped beside me. She was sharp-eyed, quick-witted, the kind of person who saw what others pretended not to. "Hey," she murmured, keeping her voice low. "I saw the way he talks to you." "It's not right," I froze, unsure how to respond. Most people pretended Ryan's behavior didn't exist. Claire leaned closer, her voice steady. "You're not crazy. You're not weak. He's the problem. And trust me, I've dealt with men like him before. They always go too far." Her words landed like a spark in the darkness. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of relief. Someone else saw what I saw. I wasn't imagining it. "That album you gave them," she added with a small smile. "It was beautiful." Emily cried when she showed it to me later. "Don't let his noise drown that out." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. No one had said anything kind to me about that gift since the wedding. That night, I drove home under the hum of streetlights, Claire's words echoing in my mind. "He always goes too far." And she was right. Ryan wasn't finished, because the very next week, he would cross a line that would make everyone choose a side. And for the first time, the war he started would no longer be hidden behind smirks and whispers. Ryan's insults were no longer limited to family dinners. He began turning them into stories, almost performances, at larger gatherings, neighborhood barbecues, church socials, even work events where he'd brag about his connections. One evening, during a Sunday lunch at my parents' house, he finally went too far. Surrounded by relatives, he raised his glass and declared, "Let's be honest, some of us give real gifts, and some of us give paper and glue. Guess which one's still sitting in a drawer?" Laughter rippled through the room. My jaw clenched, my ears burning. I noticed Emily staring down at her plate, her smile forced. But she said nothing. No one did. And then Ryan did something worse. He pulled out his phone, scrolling with exaggerated drama before holding it up. "I'm thinking about listing this junk on eBay. Maybe I'll get $5 for it that broke something inside me." But before I could respond, Ryan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed smugly. "You know, it's funny. Some people act like family, but when it comes to real support, they're just empty." His eyes locked on me. Meanwhile, I'm the one covering real costs, planning futures, building a life. "Isn't that right, Em?" Emily stammered. "Ryan." But he cut her off, enjoying the spotlight. The room went silent. Everyone was waiting to see how I'd react. For a moment, I said nothing. My fingers tightened around my glass, my heart beat loud in my ears. Then I calmly placed my fork down and looked at him. "You're right about one thing, Ryan," I said evenly. "Actions do matter more than appearances." His grin faltered. He wasn't expecting me to answer. "But you've mistaken quiet for empty," I continued, my voice steady, each word deliberate. "And you've mistaken value for price." "That's your blind spot." He smirked, but there was a flicker in his eyes. "Big words." "Still doesn't change the fact that my gift cost more than your scrapbook." I leaned forward slightly, keeping my tone calm. "Then I guess you'll be very surprised when the real gift shows up." For the first time, the room turned. Eyes widened. Murmurs rippled across the table. Emily looked at me, confused, her fork frozen mid-air. Ryan laughed, but it was strained. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. I let the silence linger, heavy, charged. And that's when I realized something. Ryan thrived on control, mockery, intimidation, dominance. But when I didn't play along, when I didn't give him the reaction he craved, he lost his grip. He shifted in his seat, trying to joke it off, but the moment had slipped. He no longer looked victorious. He looked unsettled. Later that evening, as I left my parents' house, Emily rushed after me. "What did you mean back there?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I gave her a small smile. "You'll see, Em. Just trust me." She frowned, torn between loyalty to her husband and curiosity about my words. Ryan, however, didn't forget. If anything, my calm defiance ignited something in him. The next weeks, he doubled down, spreading rumors that I was bitter, that I was jealous of their marriage, even suggesting I was trying to undermine Emily. And people started to believe him. The tide of whispers grew louder. Friends stopped calling. Aunts and uncles took his side. My isolation deepened until even going to family gatherings felt like walking into enemy territory. But I didn't back down. Quietly, methodically, I began collecting everything. The receipts for the down payment fund I had prepared, the documentation of his insults, even witnesses like Claire who had seen his cruelty firsthand. Because I knew Ryan's arrogance was his downfall. He thought he was untouchable, that I was powerless. But the day was coming when he'd discover the truth. And when that day came, his empire of mockery would crumble in front of everyone. Ryan didn't let my defiance go. If anything, it pushed him into overdrive. Within weeks, the family grapevine was poisoned. Suddenly, I was the bitter brother who couldn't be happy for Emily, the jealous relative who tried to make their wedding about myself. I heard whispers at gatherings, noticed the way conversations stopped when I walked into a room. Even my own parents grew quiet, caught between protecting peace and protecting me. Ryan was relentless. He painted me as someone who always gave the bare minimum, who hid behind thoughtful words because I couldn't afford anything better. He made a show of his generosity, covering dinner tabs, gifting Emily expensive jewelry, flashing receipts like badges of honor. Each display was a jab, a reminder to everyone that he had money and therefore power. And it worked. Relatives leaned toward him, neighbors admired him. I became the shadow, the afterthought. But behind his showmanship, cracks began to form. I started documenting everything. His words, the times he joked too far, the instances where others witnessed his cruelty. Claire helped quietly, offering to write down what she'd seen. Men like him, she told me, count on people staying quiet. But silence doesn't last forever. Meanwhile, the envelope, the real gift, waited. Each time Ryan called me worthless, each time he sneered about junk, I thought of the security it held, the down payment for a home, Proof that actions, not mockery, defined worth. And still, he didn't stop. He went as far as mocking me publicly on social media. A photo of him holding some gaudy new purchase captioned, "Real gifts versus scrapbook nonsense." Dozens of likes, relatives chuckling in the comments. I felt the anger knot in my stomach, hot and heavy. Nights became harder. Sleep slipped away, replaced by racing thoughts and a pounding heart. Some mornings I'd wake with my jaw aching from clenching it through restless dreams. But I refused to crumble. Instead, I shifted. If Ryan wanted a war, I would fight, but not on his terms. Not with insults or cheap displays. I would fight with patience, preparation, and precision. I reached out to a lawyer friend just to ask questions about gifting funds, about protections, about documentation. I started planning carefully, making sure that when the time came, my actions would speak for themselves. The photo album, once mocked, now became a symbol to me. It sat on my desk, untouched, its pressed flowers still intact. Every time I looked at it, I remembered why I had made it. Not for Ryan's approval, but for Emily's future. It reminded me of my strength, of the values Ryan couldn't touch, and the more he tried to tear me down, the stronger my resolve grew. Claire noticed it too. One evening, she said, "He's overplaying his hand. People are laughing now, but when the truth comes out, they'll see him for what he really is." I nodded, my jaw set. The day of reckoning is coming. And it was. Because Ryan had made one fatal mistake. He thought I had nothing. He didn't know about the envelope. He didn't know about the witnesses. He didn't know that every cruel word was a nail in his own coffin. All he knew was the spotlight. And soon, that same spotlight would expose him in front of everyone he had fooled. The countdown had already begun. The breaking point came at Emily and Ryan's housewarming party, just a few months after the wedding. They'd rented out a sleek event hall, draped in white and gold, with towering champagne flutes stacked like a pyramid. Ryan had insisted on making it grand, his way of showing off the new house and by extension himself. Family, friends, neighbors, everyone was there. I almost didn't go, but Claire's voice echoed in my head. He always goes too far. If this was the battlefield, then I was ready. As expected, Ryan didn't waste time. The moment I walked in, he raised his glass. Well, look who decided to show up. Hey everyone, careful. He might have brought another scrapbook. Laughter followed, sharp and familiar. I didn't flinch. Not this time. The evening carried on, Ryan basking in the glow of admiration. He gave a loud, boastful toast about building a future with hard work and real gifts, making a point to glance at me with that smug grin. And that's when I stood. My hands didn't shake. My voice was calm, steady, so quiet at first that people leaned in to hear. "Ryan," I said, "you've made it clear how you feel about my gift. You've told the story enough times. But what you never knew is that the album wasn't the whole gift. It was only the beginning." The room went still. The laughter died. I reached into my bag and pulled out the plain white envelope. I placed it on the table between us. "This," I continued, my voice firm, "is a certified check. A down payment for a home, a future, security something real." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. Ryan's smirk collapsed, his face draining of color. "You called my gift junk," I said, meeting his eyes. "But the truth is, you never bothered to look deeper. You measured everything by the price tag, and in doing so, you revealed exactly who you are." Ryan stammered, That's not," but his voice cracked, trembling. Emily stepped forward, picking up the envelope with shaking hands. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at me, then back at her husband. "You knew nothing about this, did you, Ryan?" He sputtered. I thought," The silence in the room was suffocating. Every pair of eyes bore down on him. The man who had strutted for months, mocking, laughing, basking in false power, now stood exposed. His hands trembled as he tried to regain footing, but there was nothing left to stand on. I drew in a slow breath, then spoke the words I'd been holding for so long. I don't want apologies, Ryan. I don't want excuses. What I want, what we all deserve, is change. Respect. Because worth isn't something you measure in dollars. It's something you build with honesty, with integrity, with love. The room erupted, not in laughter, but in quiet murmurs of agreement. Claire's eyes met mine across the crowd, her expression proud. Ryan lowered his gaze, his face red, his mouth opening and closing without sound. For the first time, he looked small. The spotlight he had craved so desperately had finally betrayed him. And as Emily clutched the envelope to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks, the truth settled like a stone in the room. Ryan's empire of mockery had collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance. The party didn't end the way Ryan had planned. After my words, the room carried a tension so heavy, it felt like the air itself was thicker. People avoided his eyes. The cousins who once laughed at his jokes shifted uncomfortably. Neighbors who admired his flash whispered behind hands. The spell he had cast for months shattered in a single moment. Emily held the envelope tightly, as though it weighed more than just paper. It was a symbol now, of truth, of loyalty, of everything Ryan had ignored. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, looking at me. I smiled softly. Because gifts aren't meant to be bragged about. They're meant to be given. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she nodded. But when she turned to Ryan, her expression hardened. "And you humiliated him, over and over, for something you never even understood." Ryan tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I thought, "No!" Emily cut him off, her voice trembling but firm. "You never thought. You only mocked. You only measured." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. From that night forward, things shifted. Ryan didn't regain his old shine. People stopped laughing at his jokes. Family members who had once been silent began to quietly admit they'd always been uncomfortable with his cruelty. His loudness no longer carried weight, it carried shame. Emily stood by me more often. She visited, sometimes with Claire, sometimes alone. At first she seemed torn, caught between love and disappointment. But little by little, the cracks in her marriage widened. Ryan tried to patch them with gifts, with empty apologies, with more of the same bravado. But the truth was out, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. I never gloated. I didn't need to. His downfall wasn't my victory. It was the natural consequence of his arrogance. Instead, I focused on building. The down payment fund, once tucked in an envelope, became something more. Emily eventually confided in me that she wanted to leave Ryan, that she wanted to start fresh. She wasn't ready yet, but knowing she had that envelope gave her courage. A way out. A new beginning. As for me, I framed one page from the photo album, the one with the lighthouse pressed from dried flowers. It hung in my living room, a reminder, a symbol of light that stays steady, no matter how rough the waves. The same family that once looked through me began to look differently. Uncles asked for my advice. Cousins apologized for laughing when Ryan mocked me. Even my parents, who had stayed neutral for so long, told me one evening, "We're proud of how you handled this. Quiet but strong." Ryan never apologized directly, but he didn't need to. His silence, his shrinking presence at gatherings, was its own admission. The man who once strutted into rooms now kept his eyes down, his jokes dull, his audience gone. I had peace. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of knowing I hadn't lowered myself to his level. I had waited, endured, and let truth speak for itself. And as I stood one evening on my porch, Watching the sun bleed gold across the sky, I thought of the opening night, the humiliation, the laughter, the sting of being dismissed. That moment had felt like an ending. But now I understood. It wasn't the end at all. It was the beginning of something better. A boundary. A truth. A life where my worth was no longer dictated by someone else's shallow judgment. Because in the end, Ryan's downfall wasn't just about him losing. It was about me finally choosing to stand tall. And that, quiet, steady, unshakable, was victory. Have you ever been dismissed, mocked, or made to feel small by someone who thought they held the power? Maybe it was a relative, a boss, or even a so-called friend. People like Ryan thrive on noise, but when the truth finally speaks, it drowns them out. Your worth isn't something they can measure, steal, or laugh away. It doesn't live in a price tag or a spotlight. Worth is in the actions you take, the love you give, and the boundaries you build. So I'll ask you, when have you faced someone who tried to belittle you? And how did you rise above it? Share your story below. Let's remind each other, worth isn't something they give you. It's something you claim for yourself.